The rain drummed against the windows of the animal shelter as Sarah walked down the long hallway lined with kennels. Each cage held a story of abandonment, hope, and longing. But there was one kennel that always made her heart sink a little deeper. In the corner behind thick metal bars sat a large German Shepherd mix with one cloudy eye, and scars running down his left side. His name was Bruno, though most of the staff had started calling him the problem dog. He had been at the shelter for 8 months now, longer than any other animal they had ever housed. Bruno wasn't aggressive or mean, but something about his appearance seemed to scare people away. His missing eye, the result of an infection that went untreated before he arrived, gave him a lopsided look that made visitors uncomfortable. The scars on his side told a story of abuse that no one wanted to hear. Sarah had been working at the Riverside Animal Shelter for 3 years, and she had seen many animals come and go. Some found homes within days, their puppy-like charm or perfect appearance making them irresistible to families. Others took weeks or months, but eventually, someone would fall in love with their personality and take them home. But Bruno was different. Bruno seemed destined to grow old within these concrete walls. Every morning, Bruno would sit at the front of his kennel with his tail wagging hopefully. His one good eye would scan each person who walked by, looking for that special connection that might change his life. When children approached, he would gently press his nose against the bars, hoping for a pat on the head. When adults stopped to read his information card, he would do his best to look friendly and approachable. But time after time, people would read about his medical history, notice his scars, and move on to the next kennel. The shelter had tried everything to help Bruno find a home. They featured him on their website with the most flattering photos they could take. They brought him to adoption events in the park, where families could meet him in a more relaxed setting. They even reduced his adoption fee to almost nothing, hoping that might convince someone to give him a chance. But nothing worked. Dr. Martinez, the shelter's veterinarian, had grown particularly fond of Bruno during his long stay. She often spent her lunch break sitting with him in the small outdoor run, watching him chase tennis balls with the enthusiasm of a puppy despite being 6 years old. She knew that beneath his scarred exterior was a dog with incredible intelligence and loyalty. Bruno had learned to sit, stay, shake hands, and even roll over during his time at the shelter. He was house-trained, good with other dogs, and gentle with children. In every way that mattered, he was the perfect pet. But people couldn't see past his appearance. Sarah had lost count of how many times she had heard potential adopters say things like, "Oh, what happened to his eye?" Or "Those scars look scary," or simply, "I think we'll look at some other dogs." Each rejection seemed to dim the light in Bruno's remaining eye just a little bit more. The hardest part was watching Bruno's behavior change as the months passed. In the beginning, he had been excited and energetic, bouncing around his kennel whenever someone approached. He would bark happy greetings and spin in circles when volunteers came to take him for walks. But as rejection followed rejection, Bruno began to withdraw. He started spending more time lying in the back corner of his kennel, his head resting on his paws. His tail wagged less frequently, and when it did, it seemed more hesitant, as if he was afraid to hope too much. The shelter staff did their best to keep Bruno's spirits up. Maria, who worked the evening shift, would always bring him special treats and spend extra time brushing his thick coat until it shone. Tom, the maintenance worker, had built Bruno a special elevated bed to help with the arthritis that was developing in his back legs from sleeping on the cold concrete floor. Even Janet, the strict shelter director, had been known to sneak Bruno extra food and longer walks when she thought no one was looking. Despite all the love and attention from the staff, everyone knew that shelter life was taking its toll on Bruno. Dogs weren't meant to live in kennels forever, no matter how well-intentioned their caretakers were. Bruno needed a family, a home, and someone who would love him for who he was rather than judge him for what he looked like. As autumn turned to winter, the shelter faced a difficult decision. Bruno was taking up space that could be used for more adoptable animals. The board of directors had started asking questions about the resources being spent on a dog that might never find a home. There were whispers about making room and difficult choices that made Sarah's stomach turn. One particularly cold December morning, Sarah found Bruno lying in his usual spot at the back of his kennel. But something was different. His food bowl was untouched, and he didn't lift his head when she called his name. For a moment, her heart stopped, fearing the worst. But then she saw the gentle rise and fall of his chest and realized he was simply sleeping. When Bruno finally opened his eye and saw Sarah standing there, he slowly got to his feet and walked to the front of the kennel. But instead of his usual hopeful expression, there was something resigned in his gaze. It was as if he had finally accepted that this kennel would be his forever home. Sarah knelt down and reached through the bars to scratch behind Bruno's ears. "Don't give up, boy," she whispered. "Someone out there is looking for exactly the kind of dog you are. They just haven't found you yet." But as she said the words, Sarah wondered if she was trying to convince Bruno or herself. 8 months was a long time in shelter years, and every day that passed made Bruno's chances of adoption slimmer. The reality was that most people wanted young, healthy, beautiful dogs without baggage or medical issues. Bruno, with his missing eye, his scars, and his age, simply didn't fit that description. As Sarah walked away from Bruno's kennel that morning, she made a silent promise. She would not let Bruno become another statistic, another animal who lived out his days in a shelter, because the world couldn't see past his imperfections. Somewhere out there was the right person for Bruno, someone who would see his gentle heart and loyal spirit instead of his scars. She just had to find a way to bring them together. The question was, how much time did she have left? 3 states away, in a small apartment overlooking a busy street, Marcus Thompson sat at his kitchen table staring at his laptop screen. The cursor blinked in the search box of the local animal shelter website, but he couldn't bring himself to type anything. For months, his friends and family had been telling him the same thing. "You need to get a dog, Marcus. It'll be good for you." Marcus was 42 years old and had been living alone for the past 2 years since his divorce. His ex-wife had taken their golden retriever, Sonny, along with most of their shared belongings. The silence in his apartment was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of traffic outside or the upstairs neighbor's television. His sister Emma called it depression, but Marcus preferred to think of it as an adjustment period that was taking longer than expected. The truth was, Marcus was scared. Scared of opening his heart again only to have it broken. Scared of the responsibility of caring for another living being. Scared of admitting that he was lonely enough to need a pet for companionship. But the empty apartment felt more suffocating with each passing day. And even Marcus had to admit that something needed to change. His therapist, Dr. Chen, had suggested that a pet might help him rebuild his confidence and establish new routines. "Animals don't judge," she had said during their last session. "They don't care about your mistakes or your past. They just want love and consistency." The idea had planted itself in Marcus's mind and grown stronger each day. Marcus had grown up with dogs. His family had always had at least 1, sometimes 2 or 3 rescue dogs running around their backyard. His father, a retired firefighter, had taught him that the best dogs were often the ones that others had given up on. "Damage doesn't mean broken," his father used to say. "Sometimes it just means they need someone who understands." But Marcus hadn't grown up to be the confident man his father was. His divorce had shattered his self-esteem, and his demanding job as an accountant left him feeling drained and disconnected from the world. He had always been the careful type, the one who researched every decision thoroughly before acting. The idea of walking into a shelter and choosing a dog felt overwhelming. Finally, after weeks of internal debate, Marcus typed "dog adoption" into the search bar. The Riverside Animal Shelter's website appeared first in the results, and he clicked on it with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The homepage showed a slideshow of happy families with their newly adopted pets, all smiling faces and wagging tails. It looked so easy, so natural. Why did it feel so difficult for him? Marcus clicked on the available dogs section and began scrolling through the photos. There were puppies with enormous eyes and playful expressions, adult dogs with glossy coats and perfect features, and senior dogs with gentle faces and detailed descriptions of their loving personalities. Each profile seemed designed to tug at heartstrings and inspire immediate action. But as Marcus scrolled through page after page of adoptable dogs, something strange happened. None of them felt right. They were all beautiful, well-trained, and came with glowing recommendations from the shelter staff. But Marcus found himself looking for something else, something he couldn't quite define. He wanted a dog that needed him as much as he needed a dog. Near the bottom of the list, Marcus found a profile that made him pause. The photo showed a large German Shepherd mix with thick dark fur and intelligent eyes. But something was different about this dog. The angle of the photo seemed intentional, showing mostly the right side of the dog's face. The description was longer than the others and more honest about the dog's challenges. Bruno is a 6-year-old German Shepherd mix who has been with us for 8 months, the profile read. He is fully house-trained, knows basic commands, and gets along well with other dogs and children. Bruno lost his left eye due to an untreated infection before coming to us, and he has some scarring from his previous life. He may not be the most handsome dog in the shelter, but he has the biggest heart. Bruno is looking for someone who can see past his appearance and appreciate his loyal, gentle nature. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time. Something about Bruno's expression reminded him of how he felt most days. Hopeful but cautious, wanting to trust but afraid of being hurt again. He clicked on the link to see more photos and found several showing Bruno from different angles, including clear shots of his missing eye and the scars along his side. Instead of being put off by Bruno's appearance, Marcus felt drawn to him. Here was a dog who had clearly been through difficult times but was still trying to find happiness. Here was an animal that had been overlooked and rejected, just like Marcus felt he had been. The connection was immediate and unexpected. Marcus read Bruno's profile 3 more times, absorbing every detail. The dog was 6 years old, which meant he was past the puppy stage but still had many good years ahead. He was house-trained and knew basic commands, which would make the transition easier. He got along with other dogs and children, showing that his difficult past hadn't made him aggressive or fearful. But it was the note at the bottom of the profile that really caught Marcus's attention. Bruno has been with us longer than any other dog in our care. He's a wonderful companion who just needs someone willing to give him a chance. Marcus had been given second chances in his life. After his divorce, his boss had been understanding about his decreased productivity. His sister had let him stay in her guest room for 2 months while he found his own place. His therapist had helped him see that his failures didn't define him. Maybe it was time for him to give someone else a second chance. Without allowing himself to overthink it, Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the shelter's number. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. "Riverside Animal Shelter, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Hi, I'm calling about one of your dogs. Bruno, the German Shepherd mix. I was wondering if I could come meet him." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Marcus wondered if he had said something wrong. Then Sarah's voice came back, even more enthusiastic than before. "Oh, you're interested in Bruno? That's wonderful. He's such a special dog. When would you like to come in?" Marcus looked at his calendar, noting that it was Saturday and he had no plans. Would today be possible? "I know it's short notice, but today would be perfect," Sarah interrupted. "We're open until 5 o'clock. Can I get your name and some basic information?" As Marcus provided his details, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness building in his chest. He was actually doing this. After months of thinking and hesitating, he was taking action. By this evening, he might have a dog sleeping in his apartment. "One thing I should mention," Sarah said as they wrapped up the call. "Bruno has been here for a while and he's been passed over many times. He might be a little shy at first, but don't let that discourage you. He just needs time to trust." Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "I understand completely. Sometimes we all need time to trust." After hanging up, Marcus looked around his quiet apartment with new eyes. Tomorrow, if things went well, this place might finally feel like a home again. Marcus arrived at the Riverside Animal Shelter 30 minutes early, his hands trembling slightly as he parked his car. The building was larger than he had expected, a modern facility with large windows and colorful signs promoting pet adoption. Through the glass doors, he could see families walking around with clipboards, children pointing excitedly at different animals, and staff members in blue uniforms moving purposefully through the space. For a moment, Marcus considered driving away. The scene inside looked so normal, so confident. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they wanted and how to get it. He felt like an imposter, a middle-aged man who couldn't even decide what to have for breakfast most mornings, pretending he was ready to take care of another living being. But then he remembered Bruno's profile, the note about him being overlooked for 8 months, and Marcus forced himself out of the car. If Bruno could survive 8 months in a shelter without giving up hope, Marcus could certainly walk through a set of doors. Sarah was exactly what Marcus had imagined from her voice on the phone. Warm, energetic, and genuinely excited to see him. She was probably in her late 20s, with curly brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and paint stains on her uniform, that suggested she had been working on kennel maintenance. "You must be Marcus," she said, extending her hand with a bright smile. "I'm so glad you came in. I have to tell you, when you called about Bruno, it made my whole week. He's been waiting so long for someone to show interest." Marcus shook her hand, feeling some of his nervousness ease. "I have to admit I'm a little nervous. It's been a while since I've had a dog." "That's completely normal," Sarah assured him. "Taking on a pet is a big decision. Why don't we start by talking about what you're looking for, and then I'll introduce you to Bruno." They sat in a small office filled with adoption paperwork and photos of successful adoptions. Sarah asked Marcus about his living situation, his work schedule, and his experience with dogs. Her questions were thorough but not intrusive, and Marcus found himself relaxing as he talked about his childhood dogs and his current need for companionship. "Bruno sounds perfect for what you're describing," Sarah said after hearing about Marcus's quiet lifestyle and desire for a loyal companion. "He's past the destructive puppy phase, he's incredibly well-behaved, and he just wants someone to love him. But I should prepare you for his appearance. Some people find it startling at first." Marcus nodded. "I saw the photos online. I know about his eye and the scars." Sarah studied his face carefully. "Most people say that, but seeing him in person can be different. Bruno has learned to recognize when people are uncomfortable with how he looks. He'll actually back away if he senses someone is afraid or put off by his appearance." "Has anyone actually spent time with him recently? Actually gotten to know him?" "A few people have taken him out for walks or spent time in our meet and greet rooms, but no one has seriously considered adopting him. Most people take one look and decide he's not what they had in mind." Sarah's expression grew sad. "It's heartbreaking because he's honestly one of the best dogs we've ever had here." Marcus felt a surge of anger on Bruno's behalf. How could people be so shallow? How could they judge an animal based on scars that told a story of survival, rather than weakness? "Can I meet him now?" Marcus asked. Sarah's face lit up. "Absolutely. Let me go get him." She led Marcus to a small room with a bench, some toys, and a water bowl. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and there were windows on two sides that let in natural light. It felt more like a living room than an institutional space. "I'll bring Bruno in, and you two can spend as much time as you want getting to know each other. There's no pressure, and if you decide he's not the right fit, that's okay too." Marcus sat on the bench and tried to calm his racing heart. Through the door, he could hear Sarah's voice talking to someone, her tone gentle and encouraging. Then the door opened, and Marcus got his first look at Bruno in person. The dog was larger than Marcus had expected, probably 80 pounds of solid muscle and thick fur. His coat was a beautiful mixture of black and brown, and his remaining eye was a warm amber color that seemed to take in everything at once. The missing left eye was covered by fur and healed skin, giving Bruno a lopsided but not unattractive appearance. The scars on his side were more prominent in person, but they looked like old wounds that had healed completely. But what struck Marcus most was Bruno's demeanor. The dog entered the room cautiously, his head lowered and his tail held low. He looked at Marcus briefly, then away, as if he was afraid of being rejected again. There was something heartbreakingly polite about the way Bruno positioned himself near the door, ready to leave if Marcus showed any sign of discomfort. "Hey there, Bruno," Marcus said softly, remaining seated on the bench. "I'm Marcus." Bruno's ear twitched at the sound of his name, and he glanced at Marcus again. This time their eyes met and held for several seconds. Marcus saw intelligence, wariness, and a deep longing for connection. It was like looking in a mirror. "Sarah tells me you've been here for 8 months," Marcus continued, keeping his voice calm and steady. "That's a long time to wait for the right person to come along." At the mention of Sarah's name, Bruno's tail gave a small wag. He took a tentative step closer to Marcus but still maintained his distance. Marcus had an idea. He slid off the bench and sat on the floor, making himself smaller and less intimidating. "I know what it's like to feel like nobody wants you," he said quietly. "I've been pretty lonely myself lately." Something in Marcus's tone must have reached Bruno because the dog's posture began to relax. His tail lifted slightly and he took another step forward. "I lost my family too," Marcus continued, surprised by his own honesty. "Not the same way you did, but I understand what it's like to start over." Bruno was now close enough for Marcus to reach out and touch, but Marcus kept his hands in his lap, letting the dog set the pace. They sat there for several minutes just looking at each other and adjusting to each other's presence. Finally, Bruno took the last few steps and sat down next to Marcus, close enough that their bodies were almost touching. Very carefully, Marcus reached out and stroked Bruno's head. The dog's fur was incredibly soft, and he leaned into the touch with a soft sigh. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Marcus whispered. "You've just been waiting for someone who could see how special you are." Bruno's tail began to wag in earnest now, and he shifted closer to Marcus, resting his head against Marcus's leg. The gesture was so trusting, so hopeful that Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, with Marcus gently petting Bruno and talking to him about everything and nothing. Bruno seemed to drink in the attention, his whole body relaxing as he realized that Marcus wasn't going to leave or reject him. When Sarah finally knocked on the door to check on them, she found Marcus on the floor with Bruno lying across his lap, both of them looking more content than they had in months. "So," she said with a knowing smile, "how do you think you two are getting along?" Marcus looked down at Bruno, who was gazing up at him with complete trust and affection. "I think we understand each other pretty well." The paperwork took longer than Marcus had expected, but he didn't mind. Every few minutes he would glance over at Bruno, who was lying quietly beside his chair, still hardly believing that this was really happening. Sarah had explained that the shelter liked to be thorough with their adoptions, especially for dogs who had been waiting as long as Bruno had. Dr. Martinez, the shelter veterinarian, came in to discuss Bruno's medical history and ongoing care needs. She was a small woman with kind eyes who clearly cared deeply about all the animals in her charge, but Marcus could see she had a special soft spot for Bruno. "Bruno's eye was removed about 6 months before he came to us," she explained, showing Marcus the medical records. "The infection was severe, but the surgery went well and he's completely healed now. He's adapted remarkably well to having one eye. His depth perception is slightly affected, so he might bump into things occasionally, especially in new environments, but most of the time you wouldn't even notice." Marcus nodded, scratching behind Bruno's ears as the dog pressed against his leg. "What about the scars on his side?" Dr. Martinez's expression grew more serious. "Those are older injuries, probably from when he was very young. They've healed completely and don't cause him any pain, but they tell us that Bruno had a rough start in life. Despite that, he's never shown any signs of aggression or fear-based behaviors. He's actually one of the most emotionally stable dogs I've ever worked with." "How is that possible?" Marcus asked. "After everything he's been through?" "Some animals, like some people, are just naturally resilient," Dr. Martinez replied. "Bruno seems to have an innate understanding that not all humans are the same. He doesn't let his past experiences color his view of new people. It's actually quite remarkable." As they completed the medical discussion, Sarah returned with the final adoption papers. Marcus read through everything carefully, wanting to make sure he understood his responsibilities completely. The adoption fee had been reduced significantly, which Sarah explained was their policy for animals who had been at the shelter for extended periods. "We just want to see them in good homes," she said. "Bruno has cost us more in boarding fees than we'll ever recoup, but that's not why we do this work." Marcus signed the papers with a sense of ceremony, as if he was signing a contract that would change both his and Bruno's lives forever. In many ways, that's exactly what he was doing. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as they finished the paperwork. "Bruno came to us with this." She pulled out a worn leather collar with a simple metal tag. "It just has his name on it, no owner information. We usually replace collars, but Bruno seemed distressed when we tried to take this one off, so we left it. It might be the only thing he has from his previous life." Marcus examined the collar. The leather was soft and well-worn, suggesting it had been loved once upon a time. The metal tag was scratched but still clearly readable. Bruno. Someone had cared enough to give him a name and a collar, which made his abandonment even more mysterious and heartbreaking. "We can get you a new collar if you'd prefer," Sarah offered. "No," Marcus said firmly, buckling the old collar around Bruno's neck. "This is his. If it's important to him, then it's important to me." Bruno seemed to understand what was happening. His tail was wagging constantly now, and he kept looking between Marcus and Sarah as if seeking confirmation that this was real. When Marcus clipped a new leash to the old collar, Bruno practically vibrated with excitement. The walk to Marcus's car was Bruno's first time outside the shelter grounds in 8 months. He stopped frequently to sniff the air, his tail wagging as he took in all the new smells and sounds. Other people in the parking lot stopped to look at them, and Marcus felt a protective surge when he noticed a few people staring at Bruno's scars and missing eye. "He's beautiful," said an elderly woman who was loading a small terrier into her car. "What's his name?" "Bruno," Marcus replied, pride evident in his voice. "I just adopted him." "Well, aren't you lucky?" she said with a warm smile. "He looks like a very special dog." Marcus helped Bruno into the back seat of his car, where the dog immediately settled down, as if he had been riding in cars all his life. As they drove through the city toward Marcus's apartment, Bruno sat calmly, occasionally looking out the window but mostly keeping his attention focused on Marcus. The apartment building was a modest 3-story structure in a quiet neighborhood. Marcus had chosen it partly because it allowed pets and had a small fenced yard that residents could use. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Bruno stayed close to Marcus's side, his tail wagging but his demeanor alert and slightly cautious. "This is home," Marcus said as he unlocked his apartment door. "What do you think, boy?" Bruno entered the apartment slowly, his nose working overtime as he took in all the new smells. The space was small but comfortable, with a living room that opened into a kitchen, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom. Marcus had stopped at a pet store on the way home to buy food, bowls, toys, and a dog bed, though he suspected Bruno might prefer to sleep wherever Marcus was. For the first hour, Bruno simply explored, sniffing every corner and gradually mapping out his new territory. Marcus followed at a distance, letting the dog adjust at his own pace. When Bruno finally seemed satisfied with his investigation, he returned to Marcus and sat down beside him on the couch. "So what do you think?" Marcus asked, scratching Bruno's head. "Is this better than the shelter?" Bruno's response was to rest his head on Marcus's leg and let out a deep, contented sigh. It was the first time Marcus had heard him make any sound other than the gentle panting from their walk. As evening approached, Marcus prepared Bruno's first meal in his new home. He had bought high-quality food recommended by Dr. Martinez, and he watched nervously as Bruno approached the bowl. The dog sniffed the food carefully, then looked up at Marcus as if asking for permission. "Go ahead, boy. It's yours." Bruno ate slowly and politely, nothing like the hurried, anxious eating Marcus had expected from a dog who had lived in a shelter for 8 months. Even in this, Bruno showed the good manners and emotional stability that had impressed everyone at the shelter. After dinner, they sat together on the couch watching television. Bruno seemed fascinated by the moving images on the screen, his head tilting this way and that as he tried to understand what he was seeing. When Marcus laughed at a comedy show, Bruno's tail wagged as if he was happy to see his new human happy. As bedtime approached, Marcus showed Bruno the expensive dog bed he had bought, placing it near his own bed. Bruno sniffed the bed politely but made no move to lie down on it. Instead, he positioned himself on the floor right next to Marcus's side of the bed. "You can sleep on the bed if you want," Marcus offered, patting the mattress. Bruno's tail wagged, but he remained on the floor. It was as if he was trying to be the perfect guest, not wanting to presume too much too soon. Marcus turned off the lights and settled into bed, acutely aware of Bruno's presence in the room. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't alone. The thought was both comforting and slightly overwhelming. Just as Marcus was drifting off to sleep, he felt a gentle touch on his hand. Bruno had reached up from his spot on the floor and placed his paw on Marcus's hand where it hung over the side of the bed. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about trust, gratitude, and the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives. In that moment, Marcus realized that he hadn't rescued Bruno at all. Bruno had rescued him. The first few weeks with Bruno were a period of adjustment for both man and dog. Marcus had forgotten how much work it took to care for another living being, while Bruno seemed almost afraid to believe that his new life was permanent. Every morning, Bruno would wake up and look around the apartment as if surprised to find himself still there, still wanted. Marcus established a routine that worked for both of them. They woke up at 6:30 each morning, went for a walk around the neighborhood, had breakfast, and then Marcus would leave for work. In the beginning, Marcus worried constantly about leaving Bruno alone. Would the dog be anxious? Would he destroy the apartment? Would he somehow think he had been abandoned again? But Bruno seemed to understand that Marcus's departures were temporary. He would walk Marcus to the door each morning, sit patiently while Marcus gathered his things, and accept a goodbye pat with dignified calm. When Marcus returned each evening, Bruno would be waiting by the door, tail wagging but not frantic or anxious. It was as if he had simply been patient, confident that his human would return. The neighborhood walks were an education for both of them. Marcus quickly learned that Bruno drew attention wherever they went. Some people crossed the street when they saw them coming, clearly put off by Bruno's scarred appearance. Others stopped to ask what had happened to him, their voices filled with pity that made Marcus's jaw clench. But there were also people who saw past Bruno's imperfections and recognized the gentle, intelligent dog underneath. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 2 blocks away, became one of Bruno's biggest fans. She was always working in her garden when they walked by in the mornings, and she had started keeping dog treats in her pocket specifically for Bruno. "He has such kind eyes," she told Marcus one morning as Bruno gently accepted a treat from her weathered hands. "You can see his soul through that one good eye. He's been through pain, but he hasn't let it make him bitter." Children were naturally drawn to Bruno, perhaps because they didn't see his scars as something frightening, but simply as part of who he was. A little girl named Emma, who lived in Marcus's building, had appointed herself Bruno's unofficial best friend. She would sit on the front steps waiting for them to return from their evening walks, and Bruno would always stop to let her pet him and tell him about her day. "Bruno is the best dog in the whole world," Emma announced to her mother one day, her small arms wrapped around Bruno's neck. "He listens to everything I say and he never interrupts." Marcus watched these interactions with growing amazement. Bruno seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what each person needed from him. With Mrs. Chen, he was gentle and calm. With Emma, he was patient and attentive. With the other dogs they met on their walks, he was friendly but respectful. It was as if his time in the shelter had taught him to read people and situations with remarkable accuracy. At home, Bruno proved to be the perfect companion Marcus had hoped for. He was content to lie quietly while Marcus worked on his laptop in the evenings, but he was also ready for play or walks whenever Marcus needed a break. He seemed to sense Marcus's moods with uncanny accuracy. On days when Marcus felt particularly low or stressed, Bruno would position himself closer, offering silent comfort. On days when Marcus was energetic and happy, Bruno would bring him toys and initiate games. The most remarkable thing was how Bruno seemed to understand Marcus's schedule and needs without any formal training. When Marcus's alarm failed to go off one morning, Bruno gently woke him by placing his paw on the bed and whining softly. When Marcus was sick with the flu, Bruno refused to leave his side as if he was standing guard. When Marcus had to work late one evening, Bruno simply adjusted his own schedule, waiting patiently for their delayed dinner and walk. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. Having Bruno to care for gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He started waking up eager to see Bruno's happy face and wagging tail. He began planning his days around their walks and playtime. He found himself laughing more, talking more, even if it was just to Bruno, and feeling more connected to the world around him. Marcus also started taking better care of himself. He realized that Bruno depended on him to be healthy and present, which motivated him to eat better, exercise more, and take his mental health seriously. The daily walks became a form of meditation for Marcus, a time when he could clear his mind and simply enjoy being in the moment with his dog. 3 months after the adoption, Marcus decided it was time to introduce Bruno to his family. His sister Emma had been begging to meet the dog she had heard so much about, and Marcus felt confident that Bruno was ready for new experiences. They drove to Emma's house on a Saturday afternoon, Bruno riding calmly in the back seat as he had learned to do. Emma lived in a suburban neighborhood with a large backyard, perfect for dogs. She had 2 children, 7-year-old Jake and 10-year-old Sophie, who had been pestering their mother about getting a dog for years. Marcus was nervous about how they would react to Bruno's appearance, but he needn't have worried. "Oh my gosh, he's huge," Sophie exclaimed when she first saw Bruno, "and look at his beautiful fur." Jake was more cautious initially, hanging back while his sister enthusiastically petted Bruno. But when Bruno sat down and offered his paw for a handshake, Jake giggled and shook it solemnly. "Why does he only have one eye?" Jake asked with the direct curiosity of children. Marcus had prepared for this question. He got hurt when he was younger, before I knew him. But having one eye doesn't slow him down at all. He's learned to see the world differently. Like a pirate dog? Sophie asked excitedly. Exactly like a pirate dog, Marcus agreed, and Bruno seemed to puff up with pride at this comparison. Emma watched the interactions with growing amazement. She had been worried about Marcus for so long, watching him retreat further into himself after his divorce. But here he was, animated and confident, clearly devoted to the scarred dog who had somehow brought him back to life. "He's changed you," she told Marcus quietly, as they watched the children play with Bruno in the backyard. "You seem like yourself again." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He needed someone to believe in him. Turns out I needed someone to believe in me too. The visit was such a success that it became a regular monthly tradition. Bruno loved having a yard to run in and children to play with, while Marcus enjoyed seeing his dog experience the kind of family life he had always deserved. Jake and Sophie started calling Bruno their cousin dog, and they would send him pictures they had drawn during their school art classes. As spring turned to summer, Marcus began taking Bruno on longer adventures. They hiked local trails, visited dog-friendly beaches, and even took a weekend camping trip. Bruno approached each new experience with the same calm confidence he brought to everything else, as if he trusted Marcus completely to keep him safe and happy. It was during one of their hiking trips that Marcus met David, a photographer who was documenting rescue animals for a local magazine. David was immediately drawn to Bruno, fascinated by his expressive face and dignified bearing. "He has such character," David said, snapping photos as Bruno posed naturally on a rocky outcrop. "Most dogs are either too excited or too nervous for the camera, but he's a natural." "He's had a lot of practice being looked at," Marcus replied, then explained Bruno's story. David listened with growing interest, and by the end of their conversation, he had an idea. "Would you be interested in having Bruno featured in an article about second chances?" David asked. "I think his story could help other overlooked dogs find homes." Marcus looked at Bruno, who was sitting calmly beside him, surveying the valley below with his one good eye. 6 months ago, Marcus would have said no, too shy and private to put himself and his dog in the public eye. But Bruno had taught him about courage and resilience. "I think Bruno would like that," Marcus said finally. "He's always been good at showing people that different doesn't mean damaged." The photo shoot took place the following week in various locations around the city. David captured Bruno at home with Marcus, playing in the park, interacting with children, and simply being the remarkable dog he was. The article, titled "Beauty in the Broken: A Dog's Journey from Unwanted to Beloved," was published 2 months later and had an immediate impact. The shelter called Marcus the day after the article came out. 3 families had already contacted them asking specifically about dogs with special needs or difficult pasts. Sarah's voice was emotional as she thanked Marcus for helping change perceptions about imperfect animals. "Bruno's story is helping other dogs find homes," she said. "He's become an ambassador for all the overlooked animals out there." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he looked at Bruno, who was lying contentedly at his feet. The dog who had been rejected for months because of his appearance was now helping other rejected animals find their own second chances. It seemed like the perfect circle of redemption. 1 year after bringing Bruno home, Marcus stood in the same parking lot where he had first met his dog. But this time they weren't alone. A crowd of about 50 people had gathered for the Riverside Animal Shelter's first annual Second Chance Day, an adoption event specifically focused on older dogs with special needs, and animals who had been waiting for homes for extended periods. Bruno wore a special bandana that read "Success Story" and seemed to understand that he was the guest of honor. He greeted each person with his characteristic dignity, allowing children to pet him and posing patiently for photos with potential adopters. His story had become legendary at the shelter, and Sarah used it to encourage people to look beyond surface imperfections. "This is Bruno," Sarah announced to the gathered crowd, gesturing to where Marcus and Bruno stood near the shelter entrance. 1 year ago, he had been here for 8 months with no interest from adopters. Today, he's not just a beloved family member, but he's helped change how people think about adopting dogs who might not look perfect. The crowd applauded, and Bruno's tail wagged as if he understood that the praise was for him. Marcus felt emotional as he looked around at all the people who had come specifically to consider adopting hard-to-place animals. Bruno's story had helped make this event possible. Throughout the day, Marcus and Bruno served as unofficial ambassadors for the cause. They met families who were considering older dogs, talked to people who were hesitant about animals with medical histories, and shared their story with anyone who would listen. Marcus was amazed at how comfortable he had become talking to strangers, telling Bruno's story with pride and passion. The best part, Marcus told a young couple who were considering a three-legged beagle, is that when you adopt a dog that others have overlooked, you know they'll never take your love for granted. Bruno appreciates every single day we have together in a way that's just incredible to witness. By the end of the event, 12 dogs had found new homes, including several who had been at the shelter for months. The three-legged beagle went home with the young couple Marcus had spoken to. An elderly golden retriever with arthritis was adopted by a retired teacher who wanted a calm companion. A blind Labrador mix found a family with teenage children who were excited about learning to care for a special needs dog. As they helped clean up after the event, Dr. Martinez approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked. Bruno's story hasn't just helped him find a home. It's changed how our entire community thinks about rescue animals. We've had a 30% increase in adoptions of older and special needs dogs since that article came out. Marcus looked down at Bruno, who was lying in the grass, contentedly watching the activity around him. I think Bruno always knew he was meant to help other dogs. He just needed a platform to do it. The drive home was quiet and comfortable, as their drives always were. Bruno rode in his usual spot in the back seat, occasionally looking out the window but mostly keeping his attention on Marcus. As they pulled into their parking space, Marcus realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking of this as his apartment and started thinking of it as their home. Inside, Bruno immediately went to his favorite spot on the couch, a worn cushion that now bore the permanent impression of his body. Marcus joined him, as had become their evening routine, and Bruno rested his head on Marcus's lap with a contented sigh. "You know what, boy?" Marcus said, scratching behind Bruno's ears. "I think we make a pretty good team." Bruno's response was to shift closer and let out a soft rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but wasn't quite a sigh either. It was a sound Marcus had never heard from any other dog, something that seemed uniquely Bruno. Marcus had come to think of it as Bruno's way of saying, "I love you too." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their home, Marcus reflected on how much both their lives had changed. A year ago, he had been a lonely, depressed man who could barely take care of himself. Bruno had been an unwanted dog who had spent 8 months watching potential families choose other animals. Tonight, they were both exactly where they belonged. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. There had been days when Marcus doubted his decision, when the responsibility of caring for Bruno felt overwhelming. There had been moments when Bruno seemed sad or distant, perhaps remembering his difficult past. But they had worked through those challenges together, building trust and understanding day by day. Now, Marcus couldn't imagine his life without Bruno. The dog had given him purpose, routine, and unconditional love. But more than that, Bruno had taught him about resilience, about the power of second chances, and about looking beyond surface appearances to see the true worth of a being. Marcus's phone buzzed, with a text message from his sister Emma. The message contained a photo from that day's adoption event showing Marcus and Bruno surrounded by happy families with their newly adopted dogs. The caption read, "So proud of you both for starting something beautiful." Marcus showed the photo to Bruno, who looked at it with the same polite interest he showed everything. "Look at that, boy. We're famous." But Bruno seemed more interested in the gentle scratching behind his ears than in any fame or recognition. He had never been motivated by attention or praise. All he had ever wanted was love, security, and someone who would see past his scars to the loyal heart underneath. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, Bruno followed his usual routine of checking every room in the apartment before settling down for the night. It was a habit left over from his early days in their home, when he seemed to need to confirm that everything was safe and secure. Now it was just part of who he was, a quirk that Marcus found endearing. When they finally settled into bed, Bruno now slept on his own side of the mattress. Having gradually worked his way up from the floor over the course of several months, Marcus reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, If someone had told him that his life would be completely transformed by adopting a scarred, one-eyed dog that no one else wanted, he would have thought they were crazy. But as Bruno settled against his side with a contented sigh, Marcus realized that sometimes the best things in life came in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes what looked broken on the surface was actually perfect underneath. And sometimes, when you opened your heart to someone who had been rejected by the world, you discovered that they had been waiting for you all along. Bruno's breathing deepened as he drifted off to sleep, but his paw remained in contact with Marcus's hand under the covers. It was a small gesture that spoke volumes about trust, love, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. They had both been lost when they found each other, but together, they had discovered that being unwanted by some people only made being wanted by the right person that much more precious. In the morning, they would wake up and start another day together. There would be walks and meals and quiet moments on the couch. There would be new people to meet and new adventures to share. But tonight they were simply a man and his dog, both grateful for the second chance that had brought them together and changed their lives forever. Outside, the world continued to move at its usual frantic pace. But inside their home, Marcus and Bruno had found something that many people spend their whole lives searching for. A place where they were completely accepted, unconditionally loved, and perfectly content just as they were.